Permit me to quickly retell that story as I understand it, of how we got into a recession. 3 reasons. 1, we were running an unstable economic structure. Oil alone contributed 70% of budgetary revenues and 90%, perhaps even over, of our foreign exchange revenues. Up to 50 to 53% of the non-oil sector was dependent on the oil sector. Consequently, the fortunes of up to 60% of the Nigerian economy rested on this volatile sector. Now, this shaky foundation was masked in the past by high oil prices. But of course, as soon as oil prices fell, the weakness showed. The second weakness in our economic structure is that it had mainly been consumption-driven, with a high propensity to import. Worse still, we were importing food that we could grow. Our unsustainable food importation bill, at some point over 1 trillion naira, was particularly damning for the economy as foreign exchange revenues dried up. In 2015, when oil prices fell to as low at some point as $28, but was still throughout 2016, we lost almost 1 million barrels of oil a day in production due to vandalization and sabotage of oil facilities and pipelines. So we lost something in the order of about 60% of our revenues. Yet we could have survived without going into a recession, and I think Dr. Teriba so ably stated that. We could have survived without going into a recession if we had savings. But we had no savings, only debt. As economists would say, and as Dr. Teriba has said, we did not have the fiscal buffers to enable a counter-cyclical approach. In other words, we lacked the savings to see us through the lean times. Why? Why did this happen? Why did we lack savings when so much money was being made? And this is the elephant in the room. And this leads us to the second reason for the recession: corruption, unbridled corruption and waste. And I think it's important for us to continue to emphasize that, so that we do not think that our recession was just something that occurred in a cyclical fashion, just another economic occurrence. No, it was not another economic occurrence. Corruption, unbridled corruption, on the scale that was unprecedented anywhere in the world, is what we experienced in Nigeria. And I think it's important for us to continue to emphasize it so we don't walk this way again. The figures speak for themselves. Between 2013 and 2015, with oil prices averaging up to $110 per barrel, sometimes going to as high as $115, at some point even $140. The government of the day somehow contrived to increase national debt from 7.9 trillion to 12.1 trillion, while reducing external reserves from $45 billion to $28 billion as of May 2015. Of course, we all know that there was very little by way of investment in infrastructure and capital projects. In fact, in 2015, capital spend was less than 11%. So there was very little to show for where this money went. I don't want to keep repeating what some of the incredible things that happened a few weeks before the elections, how large sums of money, 100 billion naira in cash, ostensibly for security, $289 million in cash, paid out in the same period. No country can survive that kind of unbridled waste and corruption. No country can survive it. So we must never forget that corruption is perhaps the most outrageous cause of our economic decline. Aside from barefaced stealing or waste of resources, the inflation of contracts and other procurements ensures that the cost of infrastructure necessary for development will always be unaffordable. So if what we should spend on building a 200-kilometer road ends up being spent on building a 20-kilometer road, there's no way we're going to make much progress. And there's no way we won't end up in some kind of economic decline or the other. Today, we can say that despite 60% or so, or even more reduction in revenues, we are bailing out the states, and our capital spend in 2016 was close to $1.3 trillion naira, the highest yet in the country's history, despite 60% less in revenues. So with more prudent management, it's possible to do more with far less money. Permit me to comment on two of the other major causes for the deepening, not the cause of the recession, but the deepening of the recession. One is the intractable delays in the budget approval process, and two, the long procurement processes. If the budget process takes up to 5 months of the financial year, and procurement is another 3 months, we've already ensured that the economy would be at a standstill for most of the year. The truth is that no developing economy can afford the luxury of prolonged executive legislative wrangling over the budget. Developed economies with strong and independent private sectors may be able to cope, but Nigeria simply cannot. Budgetary delay in a situation of national economic emergency and the hardship encountered by so many is simply wrong. It is simply unacceptable. Neither the executive nor the legislature can excuse itself. It is wrong for us to hold up the budget for that long. The delays, of course, will ensure that money will not flow into the economy and that capital projects will not be done. Now let's just go back to the first reason why we must remind ourselves about this recession story. It is so that we don't go down this road again. And how do we make sure that we don't? It is clear to this government that the solution to getting Nigeria out of recession requires some focused and determined leadership to take immediate and long-term measures to tackle our weak economic foundations. Now, this found expression in the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan of the government. The recovery intended in the plan was to take the economy out of recession. But in addition, it was to stem the slide in growth that occurred since 2014. We accordingly prioritized actions to restore oil production at home through a new vision for the Niger Delta, while working with our international partners to stabilize oil prices. The results are fairly clear. With oil production now at 2 million barrels per day, including condensates, which are not part of the OPEC quota, and our external reserves now stand at about $34 billion. A second plank of our immediate actions taken was ensuring that consumption and investment did not contract any further. The federal government paid its own salary obligations and extended support to the states to pay the backlog of salaries. In addition, our social intervention programs put money in the hands of Nigerians through the Empower Jobs for young graduates. About 200,000 have been engaged, and another 300,000 are in the pipeline for engagement. Microcredit loans for market women and artisans, and indirectly by paying for the meals for the primary school children through our homegrown school feeding program. The capital spend of about 1.3 trillion in the 2016 budget was unprecedented, but it was important in ensuring that money would go into the economy. This capital spend had a dual purpose. One, boosting growth through government spending, but also to provide the infrastructure to underpin what we hope will be a fast-growing, dynamic, and diversified economy. Moreover, we promoted the productive sectors of agriculture and manufacturing and solid minerals. And it's well known that the agricultural sector continued to grow even during the recession due to the emphasis that we placed on the sector through schemes such as the Anchor Borrowers Program and the Presidential Initiative on Fertilizers. I will return to this point very briefly. Industry returned to positive growth in the second quarter of this year, after 9 successive quarters of decline since 2014. This was, of course, due to the increased availability of foreign exchange for imports of intermediate goods and raw materials, more spirited efforts being made by local industry to source for raw materials locally, and also less onerous business conditions. Indeed, our efforts to create a more business-friendly environment yielded fruits only a few days ago when we exceeded our target of moving up on the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business rankings. We moved up, as all of us I'm sure now know, 24 places instead of our target of 20. And were named one of the 10 best reforming economies in the world. And I must commend the legislature for playing its part promptly and faithfully by passing 2 watershed pieces of legislation on the credit bureau and movable assets. And these 2 legislation were critical in the way that our economy was viewed by the World Bank and also by investors in the economy. The Economic Recovery and Growth Plan remains our blueprint for actions going forward. But let me just emphasize a few points. First, we will continue to provide strong macroeconomic management by increasing revenues and getting more delivery of infrastructure and services with every naira that we spend. We also will maintain efforts to bring inflation down, stabilize the exchange rate, and reduce interest rates. Similarly, our debt will be kept within sustainable limits, while borrowing will be used strictly for capital expenditure and to rebalance the ratio of domestic to external debt. Increasing productivity in agriculture and industry is critical. We simply must produce. Productivity is crucial. This is easier, of course, said than done, but it must be done. We are focused on agriculture and the agro-allied value chain, with our focus on cheaper and improved inputs, local fertilizer production, cheaper credit for farmers through the Anchor Borrowers Program. Productivity in the agricultural sector is at an all-time high. Rice imports have dropped by 70%, and we are fast becoming one of the largest producers of paddy rice in the world. But now we're producing about 7 million metric tons of paddy rice. Agriculture is providing more jobs than ever before as it contributes more to GDP. More investments are coming into agriculture. Walcott, one of the agro-allied companies, a few months ago opened its 120,000 metric ton rice mill in Kebbi. Indorama opened a 3 million metric ton fertilizer plant in Rivers State, also a few weeks ago. Dangote is investing in a total capacity of 1 million metric tons of rice mills, and that will be ready by mid-2018. Olam's poultry and feed mill, which was recently opened in Kaduna, is the largest in the country today. In the same vein, we'll continue to lay emphasis on adding value to our oil and gas resources. Thus, in addition to ensuring the availability of premium motor spirits and other refined petroleum products by supporting the building of additional refineries, including modular refineries, we're also seeing viable investments in fertilizer, petrochemical, and gas liquefaction plants. Ensuring the availability and sufficiency of electricity remains a major priority for the federal government. It seems to have almost gone unnoticed that our discussion about power generation has gone from talking about 4,000 megawatts to 7,000 megawatts, alongside an increase in transmission capacity. In addition, we remain focused on implementing the Power Sector Recovery Plan, the eligible customer arrangement, and boosting the contribution of renewable energy to our national energy mix. Transport infrastructure is one area in which Nigerians come into contact daily, because roads, air, and rail are, of course, essential for commerce, especially the movement of people and goods. While the federal government is making steady but strategic progress on both the narrow and standard gauge rail, it is quite evident that it does not have the resources to repair and rebuild all of the road network that we all desire to see. This is why the Federal Executive Council recently approved a revision and deepening of the Road Trust Fund, a scheme that would enable the private sector to develop roads of interest to them in exchange for tax credits. We already have had several expressions of interest on this, and there are already agreements that are going into operation in relation to this Road Trust Fund. We are confident that with this scheme and other related ones, such as handing over key roads to state governments to repair, will lead to a much improved road network in the shortest possible time. Diversification of our revenue earnings from a dependence on oil is a key policy objective for us. Aside from developing exports, effective tax collection is key. Federal and state authorities, of course, are being pushed to aggressively collect taxes. Without increasing taxes, if we spread the tax net, if we increase collection of taxes, we'll be doing far better in terms of revenues than we're doing today. The focus on oil has given rise to a complete dependence by the federal government, but more so the states, on the monthly federal allocation. So most states today earn less than 1 billion naira a month from internally generated revenue. 15 states across the country earn less than 500 million naira a month. And some states, about 3 states, earn less than 300 million naira a month from internally generated revenue. Of course, these are outrageously low earnings from taxation. Before oil, all that the regions had, the 3 regions that we had at the time, all the regions had was agriculture and taxes. Yet the West, just to cite an example, the Western region was able to export cocoa, build the tallest building in Africa, the first television station in Africa, hundreds of miles of roads, farm settlements, industrial estates, etc. The same territory and more people are available today. So there is absolutely no reason why we cannot ramp up taxes, both federal and state taxes. Lagos, Rivers, and Ogun states have shown what is possible with effective taxation and promotion of industry. Lagos generates more revenue now annually than 31 states put together. The revolution started in 2004 when President Obasanjo seized the local government funds of Lagos State. With almost 40% loss of income from FAC, Lagos began an aggressive reform of its own tax system. The result is what we see today, that the state can survive without any recourse whatsoever to federal allocation. Rivers State earns 85 million, or roughly 85 million annually. Ogun State earns 72 billion, 85 billion, beg your pardon. Ogun State earns 72 billion. And Ogun State is somewhat interesting because unlike Rivers State, which has a captive market of oil companies, Ogun State has had to aggressively attract industry and use its strategic proximity to Lagos to offer a cheaper deal to investors. And so it's been able to ramp up its taxes. I think that taxes are so crucial. Collecting taxes, VAT, income taxes, and corporation taxes will be crucial as we go along in increasing our revenues. Finally, why is it that we cannot afford another recession, now or in the future? Simply, every year, we are growing at the rate of 2.6% per annum. We can only create jobs and feed our people if our growth rate is at least double that figure. In other words, if we're able to increase our economy, possibly double or triple that figure. By 2050, we will have the 4th largest population in the entire world. Over 60% of that population will be young men and women who will need education, jobs, and a future for their families. There's no society yet on earth that has had that size of population and did not have the technology, the educational facilities, and other infrastructure to sustain it. The cost of being the first such nation will be too grave to bear. Honourable members, distinguished colleagues, the obligation that history and providence has thrust upon us today is to honestly do all we can to ensure that the future of our people is secure and prosperous. We must not walk this path of recession again. Thank you very much.